Hello and welcome to the One Life Church devotional series. We cover the entire Bible in 20 months. Well, today's chapters are Ezra 9 and 10. We bring the book of Ezra to an end in alarming fashion. Well, this is what happens. Ezra discovers that the priests, the Levites, and some of the leaders have been marrying foreign women. Yeah, these guys who've come back from exile, instead of marrying people within Israel, which is what they'd been told to do in Deuteronomy 23, no, they decided to marry foreign women. And God had said, don't do that, because their idols, their gods, their customs will come in, and your children will be idolatrous. They'll worship other gods. So don't do that. So this is what it says in verse 3. When I heard this is Ezra discovering the news, I tore my cloak and tore my tunic, and I pulled the hair from my head and the hair from my beard, and I sat there appalled. He was like throwing a massive disgruntled tantrum, saying, I cannot believe that they're doing this. And then chapter 10, he takes himself to the temple, and while Ezra was praying and confessing and weeping and throwing himself down before the house of God, a large crowd of Israelite men and women and children gathered. I mean, this is a spectacle. He has their leader crying and weeping and falling on the floor and saying, I can't believe you guys have done this. And they too wept bitterly. And then they said, well, can't we fix it? Let's make a plan. And one of the leaders comes and says, let's have a wholesale divorce. Just get everybody to give away their foreign wives. Well, he knew he couldn't fix it overnight. So Ezra carries on fasting, carries on praying, and then he calls a meeting in the town square. And so all the men arrive. And he says, if you don't pitch, you're going to lose your property. So every man was there. And they were sitting in the square, verse 9 says, before the house of God, greatly distressed by the occasion. When your captain's weeping like that, greatly distressed. And because of the rain. There they are, sitting in the pouring rain. The captain's bawling his eyes out. And everybody's sitting there perplexed. And they come to this understanding that they need to separate from their foreign wives. Only Jonathan opposed this. And then they set people to go and investigate all the marriages and say, look, you're going to have to get rid of your wife and all the kids that you've had. Can you imagine it? This is what they wind up doing. Can you imagine all the kids wandering off, back to foreign lands? Well, why is dad not coming with us? No, dad doesn't want us anymore. Well, what about our friends? Well, your friends had, Israelite parents, so they're not your friends anymore. Can you imagine it? It's a bizarre ending. Now, to see whether God was behind this or not, we've got to look at this text and texts around it. So, firstly, God didn't give Ezra this instruction to cause this wholesale divorce. He didn't. One of the other leaders did. Ezra just did it. And it was Ezra's interpretation of the Bible. Now, there were other prophets prophesying at the time. Some of the famous prophets in the Bible were exiled prophets, and Malachi was a contemporary. Now, Malachi speaks into this. In chapter 2, this is what it says, Malachi 2. Judah has been unfaithful. A detestable thing has been committed in Israel and Jerusalem. Judah has desecrated the sanctuary of the Lord by marrying other women and worshipping foreign gods. As for the man who does this, whoever he may be, may the Lord remove him from the tents of Jacob, even though he brings an offering to the Lord Almighty. Basically saying, this is what's happening in Israel right now. People are marrying, foreign women, and they're trying to worship God at the same time. He says, no, they can't have that. But then he also speaks about divorce, and we shouldn't be divorcing. So Malachi, who's writing into the situation, says, don't let him into the temple. He's chosen to worship another way. But he makes it clear, Malachi, in the very next verse, that you shouldn't be divorced from your wife. Another thing you do is where he says, Malachi chapter 2, verse 13, you flood the Lord's altar with your tears. You weep and you wail because he no longer pays attention to your prayer or accepts them from your hands. And you ask why. You're wondering why, Israelite, is God not accepting? And this is basically God goes on to say, because you divorcing your wives, man. Because the Lord is a witness between you and your wife. And you've been unfaithful to her, your partner, your marriage partner of your marriage covenant. Has not God made them one? And why has he made them one? He asks rhetorically in verse 15. Because he's looking for godly offspring. So the Bible makes it very clear that you should not marry an unbeliever. But if you do, 1 Corinthians chapter 7 says you must not separate from her. And so God didn't decree this wholesale divorce and thousands of children just to walk off fatherless. Ezra does. It's an alarming end to this book. But we can see why. We can see Ezra's passion to see God's people worshiping Him wholeheartedly. The decisions we make for our friends, who we marry, who we go into partnership with, they shape our spirituality. Anyway, we're now ready for Nehemiah in tomorrow's devotion.